This is the house that Harry Bennett built. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan his stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. It was built on 152 acres of remote wooded lands in southeastern Michigan, and the fortifications designed into it would make even Citizen Kane feel safe. But what would possess someone, even in 1930, to build this kind of fortress? If you knew Harry, you'd know why. Harry gets things done in a hurry. That was Henry Ford's way of describing his chief of security, Harry Herbert Bennett. Bennett assembled the Ford Service Department in the early 30s. Some called it the largest private army in the world. Others compared it to the Gestapo. Harry's major assignment at that time was to keep the unions out of Ford Motor Company by any means possible. More often than not, those means were violent. When it came to strike-breaking, Harry Bennett was the best. His brutal tactics made him many enemies, and after repeated attempts were made on his life, he and Henry Ford decided a safe house had to be built.
Once the United Auto Workers had an agreement at General Motors, Chrysler was the next to sign. Union leaders now looked to include what they feared would be the hardest case of them all, the Ford Motor Company.
We knew that we weren't ready to take on Ford, but we had to lay a foundation for the Ford drive, and we knew it would be more difficult than General Motors was because it would be more violent.
Henry Ford ran the Ford Motor Company as kind of a personal fiefdom. It was his and his alone. It was literally his and his alone. It wasn't a public company.
This was truly his baby. He saw it grow and burgeon, if you will, and was more than paternalistic. He felt an ownership, and therefore he didn't want to be intruded upon. He didn't want people helping him run his business, which was the essence of the labor movement. So there was a natural conflict there beyond mere sharing of wealth or competing for wealth. It was, this is mine.
Henry Ford's River Rouge factory was the ultimate reflection of his preeminence. Set along the river for which it was named, the 2,000-acre facility west of Detroit was the largest concentration of machinery and labor in the world. Employing over 100,000 workers, Ford considered security a priority. He created a management division known as the Service Department to ensure order in his plants. But their tactics were not always sound.
There was, in the shadows of the Ford Motor Company, the presence of one Harry Bennett, who had developed within the Ford structure a private army of some 5,000, many of whom were armed inside the plant as a security force.
Harry Bennett, Ford's henchman and former bodyguard, was an unpredictable character. He kept a gun in his desk and always wore a bow tie, claiming to have been nearly strangled by a necktie in a street fight.
Bennett wasn't a gangster, but he hired a lot of people from the Detroit underworld to do the bidding of the Ford Service Department. He hired ex-boxers, ex-wrestlers, ex-strong-arm guys, ex-gunmen, ex-gangsters, anybody who had some kind of a frightening persona about him to keep people from talking about or even trying to organize at the Ford plant. The intention of the whole Ford Service Department was to prevent unionization in any way, shape, or form.
On the overpass at Gate 4 in 1937, myself and other people with a group of ministers were standing there on public property, not private property. We went there to make a distribution. The Ford servicemen came in.
At home, Americans feared red subversion. Congress revived the House Committee on Un-American Activities. In 1947, the committee investigated Hollywood, factory of America's imagination.
If I ever observed any communistic information in any scripts?
Well, I have turned down quite a few scripts because I thought they were tinged with communistic ideas. They haven't attempted to use me, I don't think, because apparently they know that I'm not very sympathetic to communism.
Labor delegates representing 16 million workers gather in New York for the history-making merger of the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The merger is the culmination of 20 years of effort. Symbolically, Walter Reuther, CIO President, and George Meany, AFL President, declare the meeting open jointly to thunderous applause. The meeting, however, reaches its climax with the nomination of officers for the new AFL-CIO organization, largest in the world. Walter Reuther nominates George Meany as president and is himself named one of the 37 vice presidents. From his Gettysburg office, President Eisenhower is among the first to congratulate the new labor body and to call its attention to the grave responsibilities it faces on the national scene.
Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and cotton is high. Your dad is rich and by
the end of the 1950s, a civil rights revolution was taking place in the South under the leadership of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. His organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, used nonviolent confrontation and borrowed labor's protest tools in the form of bus boycotts and lunch counter sit-ins to shed a blinding light on racial injustice.
The two most dynamic and cohesive liberal forces in the country are the labor movement and the Negro freedom movement. The duality of interests makes any crisis which lacerates you a crisis from which we bleed.
The truth of it is, not all of the unions were really ready to get involved in the civil rights movement. But Walter Reuther, Victor Reuther, United Auto Workers were. They understood that the struggle for human rights was directly related to the struggle for organizing rights.